Dober večer, good evening. Jaz sem Nada Pretnar, Gibanje za pravice Palestincev. Lepo pozdravljam vse. Bi tudi takoj preden pozabim se zahvalila Pritličju, da nas gostijo z dogodkom. Danes se srečujemo z Ahmedom Masoudom. To je pisatelj, dramaturg iz Gaze, ki sicer živi v Veliki Britaniji. Z njim se bo pogovarjala Kristina Božič, zato ne rečem več nič, ker to je več kot dovolj. Bi pa vas nekaj opozorila, tisti, ki želite, če bi podpisali, imamo eno peticijo tudi na naši spletni strani, vladi, da naj zavzame ne samo jasna stališča, ker to nekako skuša delati brez velikih uspehov, ampak naj tudi gre v akcijo in torej so nanizane razne dejanja, ki bi lahko pač odobrili in jih izpeljali. Zato vas vabimo, da podpišete peticijo. Jaz ne vem, če sem kaj pozabila, Barbara? V redu je? Okay. So what I did is simply thanked Pritličje for hosting us, and I introduced you very briefly because you will be talking with Kristina now. And I also invited the people to sign a petition we have on our website in which we request our government to take action and not only, condemn. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nada. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ahmed, for being here. Thank you to the publishing house, Sofia, for cooperating and helping to bring Ahmed to Slovenia. Not yesterday, but the day before yesterday, Monday, we had an honor to also see the reading performance of Ahmed's play, The Shroud Maker. That's the only work that has been so far translated in Slovenian. It was read by Draga Potočnjak and Ivan Peternel. And tomorrow there's also going to be a talk and this reading performance in Maribor. For anyone who missed the Monday's event, you're warmly welcome also to go there and spend some more time with Ahmed. We realized that 1 hour, 2 hours, one evening, 2 evenings are too little, that there are always still things to talk about. Ahmed has studied in Britain British literature. He finished a PhD. He has also contributed scientific chapters, articles to different journals. He's a commentator of the situation in Gaza, an academic, but also an awarded author of 2 novels, Vanished and Come What May, that you can see here on the table. In the magazine Borec, next to it is the translation of his play, The Shroud Maker, which is only one of many, actually. In 2 of them, he cooperated with Amnesty International as well. And the last one that was performed, but it is, I think, in the process of being turned also into a novel, is The Florist from Rafah, that he told us a little bit about on Monday. Today we will try to focus on everything, on life, but mostly also on the situation in Gaza, on the politics and the societies behind that. Today, the last time I checked, I think the official numbers were 65 killed in Gaza today. And the number is growing, the situation is getting worse. Nada has mentioned before the petition, one of many that have been addressed to Slovenian government. And I think in Britain we have seen somehow the most persistent protests happening on a weekly basis, but actually also many actions that are happening besides these protests that usually take place on Saturdays, blocking the army industry facilities, blocking streets, calling out the collaborators that are all over Europe. It seems that the European somehow society, although the awareness is growing, is still not really aware how bloody our hands are. And today we were also somehow faced with the news that the government of Britain is thinking about stretching the sanctions also to Israeli ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the most radical voices that have been openly calling for extermination and killing of all Palestinians. And it seems that, or when I talked to Taya Bali, who is a lawyer in Great Britain, also working for Legal Center for Palestinian, for Justice for Palestinians, he said that he feels that the sanctions at the time were also somehow just a smokescreen, that they were too little and not really what needed to be done. And I'm wondering, you coming from Gaza, coming from Britain, knowing about British history, what do you see has been done in this year, and what is left to be done? What needs to be done, given the urgency, given the genocide that we're witnessing?
Thank you, Kristina. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here, and thank you so much for coming and spending your evening listening to us, listening about Palestine and about people. It matters a lot. Your presence here is very important, not just to me and the organizers, but also to people in Palestine and Gaza who are currently suffering and facing genocide, basically. So thank you for spending your time to be with us today. It's an act of solidarity that you should all be proud of. UK politics is a very interesting question. Obviously, this news today about the sanctions for 2 ministers, I think is a step too little, too late in a way. Over 42,000 people have officially been declared killed by Israel. The number of expected people who have been killed is actually over 100,000 now, because if you count all the missing and all the others who, or the casualties who are part of the society that died because of other reasons as well. So it's a step too little, too late, to be honest with you. The challenge for us in the UK is that the UK not only sort of covers this genocide, but also they're part of it. They actually support Israel militarily. They sell a lot of arms to Israel. They also share a lot of intelligence with Israel. We have over 100 drones, British drones that fly over Gaza that gathers intelligence for the Israelis and passes on the information to the Israelis. The UK has also, the UK government, the previous government, we have a new Labour government at the moment, but the previous government stopped the ICC from issuing an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant, the defense minister, and also the 2 Hamas leaders. One of them has been killed, Ismail Haniyeh now. They've now withdrawn this case against the ICC, but it has delayed the process. If the UK hadn't done this, then we probably would have been in a situation now where Netanyahu is wanted for the ICC. And that would have changed quite a lot of what is going on politically, and their intention and their ability to maneuver and to extend this genocide as much as they like. So I think there are a lot of things that still need to be done. I think more people need to demonstrate, more people need to go out on the streets, sign petitions as well, here and in the UK. I really don't accept the fact that, well, what else can we do, you know? I think there is a lot that can be done still here by putting pressure on governments. Slovenia has been good, well, better than the UK for sure, in terms of recognizing Palestine. That's great. That's a great step, morally more than anything else. But it needs to be followed by a number of actions. One of them is cutting diplomatic relations with Israel, calling back the ambassador, for example, stopping any kind of trade with Israel as well until they end this genocide. And this is a duty and a responsibility for all of us, because in the end, if they don't do this, that means that this genocide is carried out in your name, with your support, whether you like it or not. Because when we look back in history and think, how did we allow this to happen? The answer will be is that not many people have tried to stop it. If you look at a lot of the other sort of oppressive regimes before, including South Africa, for example, the reason why the apartheid system fell there is because there was a lot of international support, a lot of solidarity, a lot of demonstrations and boycotts. The most important thing was boycott, where people, individuals, decided not to engage with the South African regime and products and artists and everything, and that led to an economic crisis within the country that led to the fall of the apartheid regime. We can do this. We can do this with Palestine. We can do this, and it's really our duty and the least that we can do for people who are suffering. I don't think anybody should accept the fact that over 42,000 people are killed, civilians, and it's okay. What is worse is like you have people like, I mean, I almost cried when I heard the news from the German foreign minister today or yesterday. I think it was yesterday, when she said that it's okay to kill. Israel is allowed to kill civilians if they're defending themselves. I mean, like how? Try to explain that to me. Like, so you're saying civilians can be killed? Like, and what happened to never again? What happened to that notion of never again? And why are we even allowing her to speak like that and so publicly? So I'm sure that you here in Ljubljana, in Slovenia, in any other part of the world, I don't think you would want to hear this from your minister. I don't think you want your minister or your government to be in that position, to be so complicit. And I think if we don't work together and come together and demonstrate and do this act of solidarity, they will do that.
And you have mentioned that you have been censored or cancelled yourself, or that there were attempts to, change the narrative, or, you're a great writer, just forget you're Palestinian. Why do you have to emphasize Gaza? So where do you feel, have things changed to the better in the sense of awareness, in the sense of people calling out complicity, being aware? How much do you feel is that, how much has change, how much change has happened in a way, especially given also the British history, the colonial story of Balfour, but even before, how they changed or somehow fragmented the whole Middle East, and also given that more and more we're talking again, or it seems that the understanding of what's happening in Palestine is coming through the lenses of settler colonialism. How important is that? How important is being aware of European history that Palestinians are paying for?
Very good question. I think overall, on the kind of popular front, on the people, the narrative has changed a lot in terms of there are a lot more people around the world, not just in the UK, who've changed their understanding of what's going on in Palestine and particularly Gaza, where before people, quite frankly, didn't care. They heard about Gaza, but it is always associated with like violence and conflict and Hamas and all of these things. This changed, and actually it changed within a year or so, right? I remember when the 7th of October happened, actually walking by my building where I work, the University of the Arts London, and the two security guards there were talking to each other, and they were saying, "Oh man, like I used to like Palestinians, but now after what they've done on the 7th of October, I can't really support them at all." And then within a few months, as people started to see what is going on and the genocide taking place, this narrative changed. At the beginning, this time last year, I had a play on. I put a play on in the theatre. I have a collective called the Palart Collective, and our mission is to support Palestinian artists. So we brought a lot of Palestinian artists from Palestine, including a comedy club, right? Stand-up comedians from Palestine. New collective in Jenin, run by the Freedom Theatre in Jenin in the West Bank. So we brought them over, and I had my play. So it was a mini festival of Palestinian arts, and it was happening exactly this time last year. Now, everyone around London, all venues, all theatres, cancelled Palestinian events completely. The theater that we were supposed to perform in contacted us and they said, we don't want to cancel, but we understand if you want to cancel. People were contacting the police. Suddenly we became this sort of like monster that nobody wanted to work with us. And my collective, the people who work with me, about six of us, the directors of this collective, came together and they said, well, maybe we should postpone, maybe we should wait and see what happens. And I said, no, absolutely not. This is needed now more than ever. We need to perform. We need to put our voices in there. We are losing our shrinking spaces already. They're already shrinking. We're not giving this platform. And now you want us to cancel because something is happening in there. We need to understand what's going on. So we insisted, and I was really, really pleased that we insisted because a lot of other Palestinian organizations and events followed suit, and then they started performing, and then we gained back that space a little bit more. But it's not enough because it's only the venues and institutions that are supportive, that have already had like a history of support, and they've been on our side for a long time, that allow us to do that. If we try to take our work to a new venue, or like what you would call a mainstream venue, we wouldn't get anywhere at all, to be honest with you. They will just say, this doesn't fit our program, that's it. And then the other part of the question was around sort of like the narrative of settler colonialism, white settler colonialism. Unfortunately, the issue for us is that our voice is never heard at all. We don't get that platform. We don't get that space in terms of people listening to Palestinian voices and Palestinian stories. We've got great writers, great poets, great singers, great chefs, great everything. In the Middle East, Palestine is the leading country, really, in producing art and culture and literature. However, try to get my work published, or if I try to get to contact a new venue, etc., there is always censorship. Always. The Arts Council England put out like a directive or a memo to all organizations, basically saying, not explicitly, but they implied saying that if you are applying for funding from the Arts Council England, then you can't talk about Palestine because it's considered political, etc. And there was a big outcry about it, etc. My play that you mentioned, The Florist of Rafah, was part of this project. And actually, we've just been denied funding from the Arts Council, which is really astonishing, to be honest with you. So I think there's a lot more to be done in that sense. We need more Palestinian voices to be represented, for people to really listen to our stories. There are people right now in Gaza speaking out, writing, making films as well, like proper films in Gaza. And I think you should engage with those, and yourself here. If the government doesn't allow us to, it doesn't give us that platform and that voice, I think it's for us as people to find those voices and then spread their words, spread their work, share them on social media, etc. Before they're killed, it's too late. I was talking to Nada a couple of days ago, and even you told me that you didn't even know those people that have been killed, because every month there's a list published of all the writers and the artists that get killed by Israel, and unfortunately people just like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't even know. You may have heard of Dr. Rifat Al-Arair. He was killed back in December. He was a very dear friend of mine. We worked together. We studied together in Gaza at Al-Azhar University, and we had so many dreams to establish a Palestinian literature festival in Gaza. I saw him in May last year, this last year gone, when I was in Gaza. But not many people knew about him until he was killed, right? And by that time, it was a bit late, in a sense. By that time, it wasn't late, because he became a symbol, and he became a representation of Palestinian artists, intellectuals, and academics, etc., which is great. And I think if he was alive now, he would be shocked, and he probably would laugh at this, So I'm really pleased that he had got some recognitions. But let's not wait for people to die so we can recognize them and share their voices, because we are faced with this campaign and this incredible media narrative that is trying to portray us as we're all Hamas, we all want to fight, we all want to die, and all of these things. And this is just bullshit. This is rubbish. You know, like the Palestinian society is so diverse, so multicultural, I mean, I was saying yesterday also that we have more atheists in Palestine than we have religious people, to be honest with you. So, and that people don't know about that. So I think let's try and find those people who are still there, who are still producing work and art, because they are being censored. Even social media censors us, by the way. Meta has an algorithm that if you write the word Palestine or Gaza, you try it yourself, your post is not going to get many likes or it's not going to be noticed as well. But we need to keep going. We need to keep fighting back as much as possible. Going back to the support idea and how it has grown. Look at what the students have done around the world. It's incredible, right? In the US, in the UK, the student encampment, it became very effective. Yet the media and the sort of narrative changed that. It became about this encampment. It became about whether they have the right to demonstrate or not, and they forgot the real issue. And we shouldn't allow them to do that. We should always focus back on the people, on their voices, on their stories, because every day there is more and more heartbreaking stories coming out.
I would like to pick up a little bit on this, what you mentioned, the censorship, but it seems also there's a lot of auto-censorship. So people are just, like super careful, especially when it comes to question of anti-Semitism. And I think one of the interesting or more original artists who is also speaking up for Palestine has been Bassem Youssef. And he has just made a parody about the ICC and Bibi's trial, I think it's something like that. And in it, he also says, so who's the boss of the ICC? It must be the Yankee supremacy. So ridiculing ICC and, somehow exposing the American influence and the money. And it seems that with Gaza, many things have fallen that have before somehow tried to shade or make it unclear, about who the rulers are or where are the centers of power. And it's incredible for me how also in your work, humor plays an important role. And it's the best way, it seems, to somehow undress the powers to be that want to show themselves as really pretty, but are actually really cruel and vicious. At the same time, it seems that Palestine, also Gaza now, it's becoming, or it has always been, this symbol of, if in Palestine there is justice and peace and freedom, then everything in the world is going to be okay. And now it also seems the international order, international law is breaking in Gaza. Raji Sourani said this also a few days ago. How does it feel to carry so much responsibility? Is that something that gives you power, or does it actually make it even more impossible to imagine change, to imagine different future, to imagine freedom away from Israeli apartheid and oppression?
That's a very good question, but one that is incredibly hard to answer in a sense. How do you sort of carry this responsibility and this weight? I think partly there is no other choice. Like there's literally no other choice in terms of I either do this or I'm just going to break down into pieces and just kind of flip basically and maybe die. And I feel that sometimes not having a choice is actually a good thing. Is in a sense, it pushes you towards carrying on, keeping going as much as possible, and gives you strength. It gives you hope in a way. I'm speaking to you right now. My sister and her kids are surrounded by tanks. Like, this is why I have my phone in here, just in case I hear the bad news. I was explaining before that my routine at the moment, midnight, I go to bed, I check the news, I have an alarm at 2 o'clock to check the news. I have an alarm at 4 o'clock to check the news, and then again at 6 o'clock to check the news. In between, I may get some sleep and then maybe not. I am really tired. I am really exhausted. I haven't slept for about a year properly, to be honest with you. For the last 9 days since I went into Jabalia, and what they're doing in Jabalia at the moment, which is something that you can only imagine, you can only read about in history books, right? Like that idea that you put thousands and thousands and thousands of people in within tanks, and you bomb them and you shell them, and no food, no water, no electricity, nothing, absolutely nothing, and that is allowed to happen. Just the thought of that, it makes me like want to break completely. I lived there, I am from there, I know every street, I know every corner, and I know, I'm telling you, if a bomb falls about 1 kilometer away, it will shake the houses in Gaza. And I know some people here are from Gaza, they know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the infrastructure. The buildings are not really that strong. If a bomb falls in Rafah in the south, you would hear it in Jabalia as well. The fear that my nephews and nieces that are going through every day. Every single morning I get a message from my sister saying, I thought that was the last night ever. My brother was killed in January. He was killed by a drone attack. He was going out to get bread for his family. They went in suddenly, they fired at him, and he was left bleeding for 3 days on the street. If there was an ambulance, if there were medical staff that were allowed to get to him, he would be with us still. But they didn't allow even an ambulance to get to him. And I had to, I'm sorry, I'm going into a lot of personal stuff in here, but I will come back to the answer. My mum had left Jabalia. She went to Khan Yunis and stayed in a tent for 3 months or so. And throughout this whole period, she was cut off with connection completely. She didn't even know that her son was killed until I told her. 3 months later, she learned that she lost her son. And 3 months ago, imagine the pain with that. And I think of all of this, and I feel I can't just go into a dark corner and like just cry and not do anything. But will that help them? Will that actually make any difference to them? Will that be the thing that they really need from me right now? And I talk to them and I speak to them all the time. And every single time I speak to my sister Aida in Nusayrat, she tells me, please post more. Maybe there will be more demonstrations. Maybe this war will stop. We've seen that there are demonstrations. We've seen that they're big, but maybe they can be bigger. That is her view from there in there. And she hasn't lost hope about that. So how could I not kind of carry that responsibility and really try and help them as much as I can? And like I said, I don't have any choice. I need to keep going. I need to keep going. And in a way, you also don't have any choice in a sense, because you can't witness this and not continue to do something about it. Yes, it can feel a bit hopeless sometimes. And yes, it can feel that it's too little. It's a drop in the ocean in terms of what we're doing. But actually, it is a record. It's documenting that support and that solidarity. And if it makes one person in Gaza happy or give them a bit of hope, then you've done something really good. You may not see it yourself right now, but I'm here to tell you about that, and try to connect to people on social media and speak to them directly, and they will tell you exactly the same. I feel that within this situation, we need to get closer to people as much as we can and learn more about them, learn more about their situation, what are the real issues there, and talk a lot to everyone that we know. I'm sorry, I forgot the first part of the question, but I feel like, you know,
how does then this connect to, talking about settler colonialism, 100 years of injustices, even more in case of Palestine, stealing of land, apartheid, international crimes. So we have these individual stories, but then we have politicians, we have then legal experts telling us that the worst things are happening. And we have academics explaining how this is actually just a reflection of the injustices and American imperialism or Western imperialism over the Arab world. And we have then the politicians saying, well, we can't do anything. We're trying, but seems we can't. So it seems, and I think this is a really difficult, somehow, this relation between the destruction, the killings, the suffering that we witness, that I think people can also feel with, and then you get this kind of a mirror, this cold iron, steel wall of very polite people telling you, well, this is complicated. Mm-hmm. It's a conflict. It has been going on for years. We've been trying. We're calling for ceasefire. Yeah. But... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's important to go back to history a bit more than, what people would like us to. They don't even allow us to go back to history a bit to reflect our suffering, and B, like our culture and our civilization and our sort of nationhood in a sense. As you see from the narrative, like it seems like day one was October the 7th. Nothing existed before. Nothing. Gaza was amazing. Gaza was beautiful. Everything was fine. And then those awful Palestinians, how dare they? Like, they just went and did that, right? And I feel to counter that sort of Western narrative, colonial narrative of what is going on right now, is to really, the simplest thing is to go back to history a little bit and learn more about history. How was Israel created in the first place? And why Palestine? And what happened then in that process? So I'm from Gaza, but I'm not originally from Gaza. I'm from a village outside of Gaza that was totally destroyed completely. A lot of us Palestinians in Gaza, like I think 2/3 of Palestinians in Gaza are refugees because they lost their homes in 1948. My grandfather was very rich. He owned lots of land, lots of houses, olive groves, so I was supposed to be rich myself, but I grew up as a refugee in Gaza with barely any food, queuing on feeding points and depending on aid as much as possible. So I think countering that narrative as much as possible by going back to history. Of course, the anti-Semitic sort of argument is very, very strong, and it's and it is correct. Of course, anti-Semitism exists to a lot more than you think it does, and especially in Europe, especially in the US, and I think around the world. And it's the same as Islamophobia and all types of racism as well. But anti-Semitism is quite specific and unique, and also connected to a certain episode in history that we all want to forget about. We all want to say never again, yet it is happening somehow in a different format over there. And I feel that going back to that narrative around, yes, of course, it's not about the people. It's not about their right to exist. It's not about, whether it is right to have Jewish people in Palestine or not, or all of these things. It's about human rights in the end. Like, who cares what it is, Israel or Palestine, as long as people have equal human rights that live there together. States change, borders change, as we very well and hear, from Yugoslavia to Slovenia. What that means as a name of a state can change very easily. Italy has only been a state for the last 300 years, and that's it, right? So things can change very easily, but what matters in all of this is the people that live there and that they have equal rights. And I think that is the counter argument in there, and that's what we're trying to say to the world, that actually we're not fighting the Israelis based on some sort of, on your definition of a religious war or anti-Semitic sort of agenda. No, what we are trying to do, we're resisting to live because we are being erased completely. Our identity is being erased. Our land is being taken. Our culture is being stolen as well, from food to music to dance. They're taking everything, My grandfather, who lived for 110 years, a fisherman who had a fish diet, lived in Khan Yunis, said to me once jokingly, he said, one day the Israelis will declare that they are Palestinians and the whole thing will be sorted, And that was a funny joke, but actually it's a reflection about. And then he said, they hate us so much, but they want to be us. And And I think that is what we need to kind of try and say to the world, is that there is a lot of theft, cultural theft going on in the process. And this conflict is very simple, is white settler colonials coming to take over a land and stealing the culture and end it. The problem is somebody I think posted at the beginning of this genocide saying, how do you convince yesterday's colonizer that today's colonizer is wrong? The problem with Israel is they're supported by colonialists who've done the same thing in the US. They uprooted people, built a new state in New Zealand, in Australia. To them it works. Why shouldn't it work in Gaza and in Palestine? I mean, the answer is like, we can't allow it to work again. We are in the 21st century. We know better now. We don't accept genocides, and that's why it shouldn't work.
Now, Zionism has been declared also by the UN as a racist ideology, and today it seems that political Zionists that we see in power in Israel are quite clearly declaring their belief in supremacy of the Jewish people and not believing in equality of all people, in equality of human rights. However, history, politics, many people say, oh, that's complicated. I don't even want to do, the thinking of that. You have also decided to include history, it seems, almost in all your works. Why is that important? How do you do it? I'll stop.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think history is very important because it really informs everything we do right now, in a sense. It can also be a good podium or a mirror to see the future, in a sense, in terms of where things might go, how things can change, etc. I feel, for me, the Palestinian history is never being discussed. From our perspective, by the way, not from Western perspective. And I'm not talking about modern history only, but I'm also referring back, even if you go back to the Crusade times, even if you go back to biblical times, etc. So our historians have never been, read or translated, etc. And I feel like, as a writer myself, I need to somehow include it in my work, but not in a kind of like documentary, academic research, history paper. I like to tell history through the eyes of people and the human story, because history makes people. Like I've just told you about my grandfather, 110 years. He's older than Israel, older than the British colonialism in Palestine. He was there when the Ottomans first arrived, and like his view is like, okay, the Israelis are going to be Palestinians at some point. That's it, done, So it's interesting when you look at history and what happened before and how things, and we say history repeats itself. It does and it doesn't at the same time, because if we know how to stop it, if we can see patterns, if we can see trends in terms of these events, we can try to influence it as much as possible. But for me, I like to write sort of stories that span over modern history, over decades. So you get to learn about a journey from one particular person's perspective and a human perspective rather than a historian, etc. I might want to give you an example, if that's okay. I'm just going to read something from my play, The Shroud Maker, which kind of really summarizes this a little bit more.
And you can prepare the questions that we will be happily taking afterwards.
So this is from the play The Shroud Maker. This is a real character in Gaza I met in 2014 after the last war on Gaza, where over 2,000 people were killed. In my opinion, the reason why this genocide is happening is because previously they killed 2,200 people and nobody said a thing, so they could do more. And this woman, during this war, she had her shop open. You know what shrouds are? The white covers that we cover the dead with. And there was this local journalist that was asking her, why do you have your shop open in the middle of this war? And basically her response, she was like, they can fuck off, they can kill me, The more people that die, the more money I make, it's fine, I don't care. So I went to Gaza the year after, and I met her, and I said, I want to write your story. And she was like, what? What story? What do you want? She wasn't quite with it. She was 84 years old in Gaza. 84 years old in Gaza means like 150, by the way, somewhere else, because you've seen so many throughout. And I said, oh, it's for a play. And she's like, play? What play? What is that? You know. Anyway, she gave me some elements of her story, which I then wrote from my own imagination, so it's all fictional. In there, she grows up in Jerusalem, and when the Nakba of 1948 happens and Palestine becomes Israel, she runs away, she finds a child on the way, and adopts this child. She ends up in a refugee camp in the West Bank in Hebron, and then in 1967, she goes to Gaza. She runs away from the war in 67 when the Israelis took over Jerusalem and the West Bank, and she goes to Gaza, and she lives there with her adopted son. Her adopted son grows up and gets married, and he has a child. When the first Intifada in 1987 happened, her son gets shot and killed, and her grandchild stops talking and runs away. So I'm going to read you from this. Searching for days, going out of my mind, asking neighbors, the Red Cross, the UN, the Israelis. Hospitals tried to help me find him. I asked the Israeli military governor. I left no stone unturned, but everywhere they told me he's probably dead. But he can't be. Where is his body? And I started walking everywhere with his photograph, asking everyone I met, his name is Ghassan, my son, my grandson, please, have you seen him? Pinning his picture on walls, on fences, in shop windows, on notice boards, walking everywhere every day till my legs gave way and I slept in doorways and village squares, from Shija'iyya to Khan Yunis to beach camp to Jabalia. Please. His name is Ghassan. If you see him, hear of him, please tell him his mama is searching for him. And I wondered if my mama had searched for me all those years back, was still searching. And I thought I might shatter into 1,000 pieces like that vase in Lady Cunningham's house. And I begged for some cloth and a needle and a thread, and I started sewing a portrait of him, stitching every feature of his little face in the canvas night after night, month after month. A shawl, a sheet, a shroud for my little Ghassan, my pillow and blanket in the wastelands of Gaza. And terrible times came and went. Arafat came and the new Palestinian Authority, and I asked the new officials I met, have you seen him? My son, my grandson, Ghassan, please, will you help me find him? And the news drifted round and about my ears as I walked and searched and sewed and slept. Rabin shot dead, Oslo dead, settlements, arrests, attacks and bombs. A second Intifada, Hamas and Gaza besieged, and still I searched. Ghassan, my son, my grandson, Ghassan, please, have you seen him? And people looked at me strangely, an old woman covered in dust, clutching her crumpled fistful of yellowing photos of a little boy from years ago. So within this section, you're following this story of this woman who's searching for her grandson, as you heard. But in between, there is like three decades of history in between. The Palestinian Authority, the Second Intifada, Rabin being shot dead, etc., etc. This section, by the way, took me the longest in the entire play to write. The entire play took less than this section because I wrote it in between tears and crumbling papers and throwing them away. But how do I tell the history without saying, and in 1994 the Oslo Accords was signed, etc., and then it becomes like an academic book, etc. Because for me, this is what history is about. It's about how it has affected people. What has that history made to her and to the story? And it took a long time, and I started cutting and editing until I came up with this. And when the actors did it in there, I almost cried as well, like, because they really they got that emotion of like that sense of history is just repeating itself, and like you're fading away completely as you're experiencing these awful events.
Any questions? Comments? Thoughts? Yes.
how do you live with this, and how people in Gaza or Palestinian people live with this? Because if I think of myself, I feel rage and almost sometimes even hate towards people that are doing this to Palestinians. So how can you live with this? I don't know. Or how can you handle that this anger doesn't consume you?
Very good question. I mean, again, it's very difficult because people don't have the choice either. One of the saddest messages I got from my brother, who's in a tent in Khan Yunis, he said to me that sometimes I feel like I just want to set fire to the tent with me and my wife and my kids and just die. That's it. Why am I waiting for death? Why am I, so they really can't live through this. They're not heroes. They're suffering a lot, and they write and post a lot about this. And they also say, we didn't choose this. We didn't even choose October the 7th. We didn't, we need a way out as soon as possible. And they keep crying out for a solution. I mentioned also the other time that my sister, who was in Jabalia, so the Israelis a couple of weeks ago, they dropped leaflets on Jabalia. They said, if you know where Sinwar is, who is the leader of Hamas, you should report him immediately. And my sister was like, what the fuck? Like, if I knew where Sinwar is, I would get him from his ear and take him to the Israelis. I don't give a shit where Sinwar is. Like, just take him, But that assumption that everybody is like Hamas, everybody's protecting Hamas, everybody wants this, everybody wants to live because we're all heroes or whatever, it's not true. I think people are getting to the point where they just are at a breakdown completely. There was, we keep talking a lot about the casualties of the genocide. A lot of the research and the numbers are about women and children and elderly people and disabled people. All really good research and numbers in there. But the group that no one talks about is actually young, healthy men who are between the age of 18 to 44. And guess what is happening right now? There are so many cases, and I posted about it recently, of young, healthy men, nothing wrong with them at all, not injured, nothing at all, just dropping dead. Like out of nowhere, just dropping dead. And they don't understand what's happening. Well, of course you can understand what is happening, but it's in Arabic we have a really good word for it. It's called qahr. And that word summarizes, it's that feeling of injustice that kind of pushes you down so much that you can't take that weight anymore and you drop dead. In a way, partly is what happened to my own dad, again, going to this person before the genocide, by the way, and I'm so glad that he's dead now. And I never thought I would actually say that. But there was a war in Gaza in May 2021, if anybody remembers it, about a week long. They destroyed the entire of Gaza, and Gaza City, that is. Over 1,000 people were killed in Gaza during that war. And straight after the war, one day after, my dad stopped talking. And he refused to talk to anybody at all. A month later, he went into his room and never came out. Stopped coming to us, to speak to us, seeing anybody at all. A few months later, he stopped eating and drinking completely. So we had to force feed him in order to keep him alive. He stopped moving, so his body started sort of failing completely. He couldn't walk anymore. We got to a point where we had to take him to the bathroom, etc., etc. And I remember going in October 2022 to see him. And I was trying, we got him therapists, we got him doctors, we got him everything, imams, sheikhs, to try and find out what is going on. And I remember a doctor friend of mine from Gaza, really good consultant, a therapist, went to Gaza, and I asked him to speak to my dad, and he sat with him, and he said to me, your dad is depressed, There were no antidepressants in Gaza to get him because they weren't allowed in. And eventually he died. He died in February last year. And now I think it's good that he wasn't in that state, living through that genocide. Sorry, sharing another personal story, but just to say that we are not coping. No, we are not coping. We are struggling a lot. On the other hand, more and more people are now joining Hamas. Hamas is also recruiting because it's a fertile area to recruit, because violence will create more violence. That's the problem. If you are a young person, if you're not going to kill yourself, you're sitting there in the tent all day. What would you do, right? What would you do? And you're so angry about what is happening. Your life becomes worthless. You have no future. You have nothing. And therefore you end up with like, okay, well, I'll join these guys. You know, at least they're doing something. And unfortunately, that is not the right way, in my opinion. There are a lot of people in Gaza who are really, again, with all these awful things that are happening, they are creating art. They are doing amazing things with children. People are going to school in the tent. They're making films. They're, you know, things are happening, but we're not talking enough about them. And I think we need to celebrate them as much as possible, without being like, oh, look at these heroes, how they're surviving and they're all okay. Because that is also offensive to them, because they're saying we're not actually choosing to be heroes in here. But to try and find ways to support it. What do they need? Is there an organization that can get them materials, books, etc.? Can we be part of that sort of insistence on life as much as possible? And there's also, like, I mean, on a personal level, there are the Palestinians from Gaza in the diaspora who also need support, that we can also try to support them as much as possible, because if they're still strong, they can support their families. You know, on a selfish note in here, but I know a lot of people are deeply affected by that.
You mentioned two things. You take my attention when you said when you read the history again. I don't think nothing like this happened in the history, like in this scenario, or I don't think. And another thing I need to mention: don't stop talk about Palestine. None of the European will feel what we are facing daily, as a Palestinian who live outside the Gaza. If we spend our life to explain our feeling, no one will get it, because they never have this kind of experience before. For that, as I believe, as a Palestinian who live outside, we need to talk in the small details to give them the feeling how to lose everything, and at the same time you need to stand to be strong for yourself, for your family here, for your half of your family there, and friends, relative, memories, everything. We need to be strong. Actually, sometimes this no option make us unbeatable. I believe we are. I'm talking about myself. Nothing will break me after that. What will happen worse in this scenario as a human? We face as it is nothing. I don't believe nothing. For that, I believe. I respect what you're doing, and I think you need to write more, to go deep in details, to tell about experience. As a Palestinians, I don't know, we were close friends when we were children. Look, how many times you were refugees outside Gaza and inside Gaza, and now in Europe. It's infinity. How people, they will get this feeling. When you read, you will get the feeling, I believe, like, continue what you are doing.
Thank you. I think it's a very important point. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think anybody will understand what we're going through, and the suffering and the pain that we're going through. And in the same way, perhaps I may not understand, another genocide happening in Sudan or in other areas, because I'm not from there, and I can obviously relate and understand the pain in there. But there are human elements that we can all relate to. I think Tanya, in my sort of email to you, I just said, I need all the love right now, and he just said, I understand, I know what you're talking about, And there's that connection, that you create that connection in there with people, that actually their ability to offer you a way out and an open arms and understanding is very valuable to us at the moment. It may not change anything, and I'm not sure, literature, books never changes the world, does it? But it creates a feeling towards change. And not just books, but also what you do, the acts of solidarity. It creates a momentum. It creates the platform to make that change. It's never going to change everything. It's never going to change how I feel about losing my brother, or the fact that my family are suffering, the fact that my sister is surrounded by tanks. But I feel it's important to continue to do it, because otherwise we're just going to leave them alone, and we'll just basically say, and that's what they want us to do. That's the thing. They want us to feel it's hopeless. They want us to feel there's nothing you can do, and I don't accept that. There's a lot still to do, and I want to speak up, and I want us to rise. We can rise, and we will rise.
Thank you. There is one thing everybody, thank you for your personal story. Of course, it's very important, and it's even more important than political story, part of the story. You said there is no such case in the history. Yes, there is. The siege of Sarajevo was like trailer of what's going to happen to people who have no oil and who are by the chance Muslim, let's say, in a very blunt way. So there was a dark humor. There was I think somebody from Gaza said, we must start digging for oil, then they will start helping us. And you see this never-ending cynicism of the West. They were watching for 2 years how Serbians, but I'm not talking about national part, because I'm half Serbian by my descent, but they were shelling Sarajevo for 2 years, and nobody did anything, and they could end that in a few days. And so it's nothing new. So we know why they are doing this, and why Israel is let alone. So they don't even try to stop them, because it's question of, it's not racism. I wouldn't call it racism, because it's a bullshit word, but it's lower how to put it. You are not. It's like Germany in the 30s, when Jews were deemed like lower beings. This is what's happening in the world. There are lower beings for somebody, apparently. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. And going back to October the 7th, it's like everybody is afraid to speak about that. Like, oh, okay, they were terrorists. Yes, but again, you said it didn't come from UFO in the middle of nowhere. And don't tell me that Israelis who know all the telephone numbers of all people in Gaza City, sending them SMSs that in 10 minutes a bomb will drop on their building, that they didn't know what is happening. So, just my comment.
No, that's a very, very valid point. But I think it's important to remember that each genocide and each atrocities throughout history, it's unique to its own right in a way. And that's why I refuse to ever make any comparison between the Holocaust and what's happening in Palestine. And when people do, I was just like, but why? It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make this less important or that less important. They're equally atrocities, and that we should stay away from as much as possible. I think you're right. There are many examples that are very, very similar to Gaza, and even worse. I suppose there are a number of things that make this one particularly unique. For example, the fact that international law has no jurisdiction whatsoever. It doesn't even exist. International law it's a new thing, I think. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that this is actually just some white European kind of protocol to protect themselves as much as possible. That's a unique thing. I think, yeah, you're right about the 7th of October. I think we shouldn't be scared of engaging with it and talking about it. I don't think, I remember waking up on that day and hating every single minute of that day, because I knew what was coming, and no, I'm against it, and I'm against any killing of civilians anywhere in the world, and I knew that this is going to be the narrative of Palestinians are the terrorists, they started this, they've done that, so it's important to talk about it. And it's not day one, it's gone a long time ago. and engage with it as much as possible. More and more reports now say that the Israelis themselves killed their own people through helicopters, etc. So there's a lot more research to learn more about, and we need that time to investigate and understand a lot more what's happening, rather than just taking the propaganda completely. But regardless of what happened there, nothing gives you the right to eradicate people, kill people, and undertake genocide completely. And you're right, like with Hezbollah, for example, they knew where the leaders exactly, they got them out completely, took them out, whereas with Hamas, they're just kind of leaving them there. It feels odd, it feels weird, but do I want to engage with this? Do I want to kind of really have whatever left in my mental well-being engaging with these things, or actually focus on giving another narrative and giving another perspective, which is the people's voice, which is for me far more important than actually engaging of what happened on that day and all of these things. But I suppose you're right. I think we need to talk about it at some point, I think soon, and hopefully when it stops and Netanyahu goes to court and all of these things, a lot more will come out and we will be able to provide more evidence around it. I was saying to Nada earlier, actually, we were talking about the SIM cards. So what happened in Gaza on the 7th of October, Hamas went in, right? And again, you wouldn't hear this because nobody told you about it. They broke through the fence, right? They bombed the fence, they went in. First, they went in with the paragliders, which nobody talked about at the beginning because it's a good prison break story. Everybody loves a good prison break story, right? Because if you talk about these guys who jumped over a fence, that's actually a good story. So the BBC decided not to mention the paragliders at all. Then they bombed the fence and went in. What happened, people, civilians in Jabalia, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, got so excited because they've been living in prison, and then this prison opened up. So they rushed to what is called Israel. It's actually their land. It's their original land. And they rushed, a lot of them, hundreds, just went to have a look because they've been hearing about this. They've been seeing the fence, the tanks, the bombs and everything, but they've never actually seen the land, what it looks like. And there's a famous recording of a guy went there and got an orange, just took one orange from there and went back. Every single person who stepped foot behind the fence got killed after. And you know how? Because the Israelis immediately, 3 days or a week after, they got a list of all the SIM cards, the Palestinian SIM cards, that when they crossed the fence, they switched to the Israeli company, right? They got a list of that. Every single person and their families, their house was bombed immediately within 3 weeks. This time, most of the people who put foot in there were killed, right? This is genocide. This is basically collective punishment to everything. And you'll never hear about this at all. But everyone in Gaza knows this. And those who went there and left their phones behind, they're still alive now, by the way, because they didn't know about them, etc. So they know a lot. And yes, you can go more and more and more into details about what happened that day. But I feel for me, especially as a writer, especially that, as you said, I'm faced with a massive sort of censorship. If I dare, say what they would consider the wrong thing, I'm going to be cancelled immediately. We have anti-terrorism laws in the UK that I could be, taken into account for that. So I need to be careful about not careful what I say, but I need to make sure that I'm still here speaking out in a way that is helpful to people rather than focusing on that day. But I think the day will come when we actually go in details and people who put in the propaganda will pay for it, to be honest with you. I have made a decision to boycott media because the BBC, CNN and others, they've actually begged me to come and speak to them, and I said no. Even Al Jazeera, I was also boycotting. Up until recently, they convinced me to do a program which I'm filming with them next month, but that's more about Palestinian literature and that's it. So I think there is a lot there to uncover still, but we need to focus on what is important right now. And right now, it's the people that are more important than anything else.
But maybe you should go to BBC and CNN and confront them about their whitewashing of the crimes and stuff like that. Like maybe that would be a better approach. I don't know. I'm just thinking about it.
I think you're right, and a lot of people said that to me. And but I feel like actually we're only helping them. We're only helping them to appear impartial and all of these things, and they can spin it. So some of my friends, for example, other Palestinian artists and writers, they've decided they can only do live interviews with them. So they will never do recorded, so they don't get edited and manipulated, and which is a good thing. But you know, like the first question they get asked, my friend lost his mother and his father and his cousin in the same attack. The first question is like, do you condemn Hamas? I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm here, you've invited me as a human being to be on TV, to talk about, you know, these things. And then the first thing is that you want a political statement from me.
They don't ask the Israelis. They don't say, do you condemn Netanyahu? Do you condemn IDF? Do you condemn the crimes? Do you condemn genocide?
Never. And then the other thing, I will never be able to have this conversation. I've just talked about the 7th of October and stuff like that, because they won't allow you to. You're there just as a victim. That's what they want you to. And I refuse to be a victim. I want to say what I want to say without them dictating what they want me to say and fit within their agenda, unfortunately. I wish it's a collective decision from all Palestinians, because boycott is very powerful, you know. Boycott is important. When this outlet realizes that actually even the audience will start to think, hang on a minute, where is the Palestinian voice? I think it will make an impact, but I don't know. I think we get very little opportunities, so I know that it's important, you know, to speak out and talk as much as possible. We have our ambassador, Hussam Zumlot. He's pretty good, like he's good, outspoken and stuff, but then he's also part of the problem of the PA and that institution and all of these things. So yeah, I don't know if it's the right approach or not, but I think for now, for me to protect myself at least and my mental well-being here is like, I don't want to see the BBC. I had a play once and a BBC journalist literally cornered me and she's like, you must come on our show. Why wouldn't you come? You're not helping your people. I was like, don't tell me how I help my people, please. Yeah, just leave me alone, okay? And excuse me, actually, you're here for the play, so either you see the play or you leave, you know, like. Because they just want you, they couldn't understand why I wouldn't go. It was insulting to them, and I feel I'm victorious with that. I'm happy.
Some more questions.
I forgot before, when you said that you have to live your life as normal. Sorry. Before you said that life has to go on even in those abnormal situations. Again, I will vividly remember when they were interviewing a very young lady from Sarajevo at the time of the siege, and she was really because women in Sarajevo, they really take care about their looks. I mean, not for vanity, but it's a thing, and they are very very beautiful women. And she was putting a makeup, and she was really dressed up as for the theater. And then they asked again. It was BBC asked her, but why are you putting the makeup? You know, there are snipers and you can get killed. And she said, fuck them. At least I will die pretty. So it was not cynicism, but it was answer to that question. Again, you said, when they corner you and they want you to play your role,
yeah,
and you say, no, I don't want to play that role, I want to play my role, and then they are offended. This journalist was also offended. Well, why? I'm just, you know, taking care about you. I don't like you to be killed or something, and you're a cynicist. It's not.
I love that.
It's not. It's really like.
Yeah, I want to see that interview. Actually,
I will find it.
Please find it for me. Yeah, I would love to. I think I think people have that in Gaza as well, and this is a really good example because people insist on life as much as possible. The difference there is that BBC was there, but BBC never goes to Gaza because the Israelis don't allow them to. They say, don't go to Gaza, and that's it. They say, okay, we're not going to go to Gaza, which I find that is complicit. But my new play is called The Florist of Rafah, and it's about this guy, a real character. I always find these real characters, you know, abnormal characters. And he was in Rafah in the refugee camp, and he was selling flowers, right? And I thought, wow, what an amazing thing. And the guy, what surprised me as well, is that lots of people were buying flowers from him. There's no food, there's no money, you know, there's nothing in Rafah in there. Whereas people are just buying flowers and going back to their tent and just saying to their wives and their partners and their children, you know, here, I couldn't find chicken for you or eggs, but here's a flower, you know. And I just found that incredible. And he was selling so much. So I started also imagining Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to him now. Lost contact with him, but started to imagine what his story was. Turned out to be that he was a florist in Gaza City. He had a flower shop in there, and he just wanted to carry on. It's all he knows. And he was saying that when I messaged him, I was saying, like, people want to think of beauty and beautiful things, even in these difficult times in there. But again, I wish there was a BBC journalist in there interviewing him the same way. I think he would have given a really good, eloquent answer. And yeah, lots of people are there doing amazing work at the moment. We need to talk about them.
Some more questions? There was, yes, on Monday you also mentioned that somehow you still find hope for better future in a way, although the situation is so horrible. And I think before it was mentioned, you know, what the situation now is doing to people, how they can imagine the future or even life ahead. And I remember talking to Majid Abu Salama, who he's from Gaza but now lives in between, I think, Germany and Norway, or yeah. And he said that, you know, what's happening in a way is also a result of the desire of Israeli politicians, so that people either in Israel or in Palestine cannot even imagine coexistence or living with one another because of the things that Israeli army is now doing in Gaza. However, he said he does believe in the possibility of, you know, equality, of respect for human rights of all, you know, including right of return, reparations, and then a new beginning in a way. And it seems, I mean, to me, for what seems incredible is that usually the people who experience really terrible things don't want horrible things to others, no matter what. And even talking to Salman Abu Sita, who has mapped how the right of return could be exercised so that all Palestinians return to their homes from where they were expelled in 1948. He said that he believes this could happen in an organized way, that, you know, there is knowledge how to do it, and that it doesn't need to include a lot of violence. What's missing is the political will. And for me, I mean, talking to Palestinians, oftentimes what surprises me is that there is very little desire for revenge, because you know what violence does. And am I mistaken?
No, I mean, I think, like I said, the issue is not about revenge. I mean, it's more about, it's about what is happening right now, and it's less so about the Nakba and the right of return and so much. It's about basic freedoms at the moment. You know, if you're from Gaza, you know that it takes you 5 days to travel to Gaza from Cairo airport. It takes 5 days through the Sinai, through checkpoints, etc. That's what I'm fighting for, that this needs to change. I need to have an airport. I need to have my freedom of movement. I need to have my goods, you know, in there, coming in and out. Basic things, you know. I think it's not about revenge at all. I think there are so many political solutions to what happened in the past, like Salman Abu Sita is mapping out the right of return. Even the right of return itself is actually, we're talking about the right itself rather than the act of return. Because if you ask a lot of people who are second and third generations who are in Syria or in Lebanon or something, they probably wouldn't want to go back. I mean, because they've established their lives, they've built houses or whatever it is. But it's about the principle and the right to be able to, and if not, to be compensated for what happening and the suffering over the decades. There are lots of political solutions around that. Is there hope that we will coexist? Well, of course. I mean, we will, for sure. This will come, but when and at what cost, and whether we will be there to be part of it or not, that is the question. Because actually, believe it or not, a lot of people in Gaza at the moment believe that this area, Mawasi area, where there's over 1.5 million people, the plan is to kill them all. People believe that, like that actually this is going to be a genocide that you've never seen before. In one go, it would go like that. And it's hard for them to imagine that we will coexist at some point, because the idea here is that now Israel has moved from wanting to ethnically cleanse us to actually kill us. They want to actually kill us. They want, their sense of revenge is so strong around it. Their acts of bombing entire neighborhoods is an indication of that. The burning of the tents recently, they're constantly bombing on the tents. And I think if they could get away with it, to bomb that area of 1.5 million people in tents, I think they will do it immediately. So the question is here, are we going to be there to coexist? I hope so. I think we're resilient enough. We will try to be there as much as possible. I think we need time of peace before we think of coexistence. Let's not think about what state looks like. Let's think just about basic human rights. You have freedom of movement, you have an airport, you have a port, you have a good economy, you have every equal thing that the other person have. Let's not talk to each other for 20 years. And then let's start process of reconciliation and coexistence, whatever that looks like. It could be two-state solution, it could be one-state solution. But in a way, you need a kind of UN peacekeeping force, which we know what happens to them in Lebanon when Israel wants to bomb them anyway. But you need a proper peacekeeping force. Says, right, this is it. Nobody's allowed to fight. In a way, you have the right to have your freedom, and the same on the other side. And then start a process of negotiation about 10 or 15 years later. I think it's possible. And the reason why it is possible is because the Palestinian culture and Middle Eastern culture in general is incredibly hospitable and accommodating. Throughout history, this is not the first time. The Crusaders stayed for 300 years in Palestine. They became part of the society in the end, or those who remained there, which were thousands and thousands of people. The Mongols themselves, when they took over Palestine and the entire region, they became part of that region in a sense. The land is generous, the land is kind to everybody, and people are quite hospitable in a sense. And they can forget, people can forget. It's not unheard of that people move on from, look at Ireland, for example, the Irish-British sort of situation. Not that Ireland is amazing politically at the moment, but despite 300 years of conflict, there is peace at the moment, and that's great. It may not work for everybody. Economically, to the young generation in Northern Ireland, it's not great. A lot of suicide cases in there because of this. Marginalized communities, yes, and we need to deal with that. But politically, as peace, it can work.
And probably what you mentioned, that either talking about demilitarization of Israel or talking about stopping Israel, what's going on. This is something that the Palestinians can't do. This is something that has to come from the international community, from Europe. This is not something that the Palestinian side can solve, right? So that they become aware that this is unacceptable, what they're doing.
Yes, there are two schools of thoughts there, because also, I'm going to be honest, because a lot of people say that and including us Palestinians, that our military resistance also encouraged military violence from Israel and gives them the excuse to do whatever they want. And that is a valid point. And I think part of the challenge for us, we need to also admit that we're not united as Palestinians. We've divided between, the West Bank, where you have a Vichy-like government who's does everything that Israel wants them to do, total collaborators, and then the other sort of side where it's resistance with Hamas and others. There needs to be somewhere in between and a united front to be able to manage that conflict, because it's a threat to our existence and our identity. So you need to be able to choose between both. I'm not a fan of political leaders at all, but the person who actually managed that very well was Yasser Arafat, in a sense, And if Rabin wasn't shot dead, imagine. If Camp David II was actually signed, imagine, So we were close to these things. We have actually live examples from both sides. Whether you agree with it or not, that's a different matter. That's a completely different matter. But it was possible. They shook hands and signed an agreement. I hate that agreement because it actually allowed them to do what they're doing right now, creating the PA, but it is possible. Yeah, but it's possible, it could be a better agreement. And that's the point. I think we also need to recognize our differences and our problems within our society as Palestinians, that we are quite divided. We haven't got the leadership to be able to kind of carry us through. A lot of people are saying, well, the Hamas leadership are just like hiding in tunnels, and that's correct, you know, because they haven't come out and all of these things. You know, some people in Gaza are saying, well, why can't Sinwar just go walk in the street, you know, offer yourself as a sacrifice? Maybe this war will end. We know that this is not going to happen, and Israel won't end the war. But that is a reflection of the society and how it is thinking. Come what may, my novel talks a lot about that and the society and the different sort of views around it. Not politically, but also from class perspective, from also from an anthropological perspective. I'm not afraid of saying these things. We're not angels. We're not heroes. We're not perfect. Nobody is. No nation. We have the good and the bad. We have bad people as well who, you know, sometimes armed resistance for them is always the way. But no, actually, there is another way. You have to be able to resist. It's a right, but you have to also be able to talk and negotiate and manage the battle differently as well, because this is a threat to our existence and our identity completely. They want to get rid of us. So you need to be able to make sure that you don't give them that opportunity sometimes. Through the negotiations, through resistance, is all legitimate. They're all legitimate tools for you to be able to resist.
Any more questions? Do you feel that the situation now is in any way, I mean, we've seen China taking spot of trying to, bridge the differences between Fatah and Hamas and other Palestinian political groups. Yugoslavia was the first country in Europe who opened a representative office for the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the 20th century. Is there, I mean, are you creating, or do you feel that there is space being created where Palestinians in diaspora, in 48, in East Jerusalem, in West Bank, in Gaza, in the refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon and Syria, where you're communicating and trying to somehow, bridge the divides?
Sadly not. And again, there isn't a diaspora kind of like community that is able to lead that kind of political leadership in a sense. And even for us as writers and artists as well, we're also kind of divided between inside and outside and all of these things. It's natural, I suppose, because you've already divided. So how do you bring in a third alternative to it? It's going to be very difficult. But also within this genocide, it's actually really, really hard to do anything, to be honest with you, in terms of thinking, in terms of mental capacity, even writing, even talking sometimes is quite difficult because you don't know where things are going to land and all of these things. There are, there is pressure on the Palestinians to unite a bit more, but it's going to be impossible because you've got the PA is basically an agent. It's an Israeli-made kind of institution that does the dirty work for Israel whenever they want to, and then the others, you can't even talk to them. You can't reach them. So how are they actually going to reconcile? It will happen at some point, and I think this is going to be part of the solution, by the way, because I think Hamas has realized that they're not going to be in charge of Gaza anymore. We know that. I think people themselves want them to be in charge of Gaza after all of this destruction. So I think there will be a way of what Hamas wants is to remain like Hezbollah, a kind of a resistance movement, but handing over the government to another party or something like this. And I think that's what is going to happen, but it will need for the war to end and the genocide to end in order for this to happen soon. But I honestly think that, we could do more, and especially in the West Bank, Palestinians in the West Bank, to put more pressure on the PA, go out in demonstrations every day to try and kind of change that narrative, and at least to ask for unity, because that would help us a lot moving forward.
And I think there is also a lot of things that we still have to do. I think we have one more question, and that's the last one, and then I have one comment, and I think we're running out of time slowly.
I don't know if this is a conspiracy theory, but there's also this thing that Israel also kind of helped Hamas, financed Hamas against PLO because they knew Hamas is going to be less acceptable version of resistance by the rest of the world. Is there any truth to that?
It's very true. No, it's a well-known fact. It's not just the truth. It's they established Hamas and yeah. So a lot. No, it's fine.
She went to this serious topic. Okay, they say ISIS. Did you hear they kill any Jewish?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Did they shot any one bullet to Israel and they are in the border? I think as European you have to put big question marks about this because they didn't attack any Israeli base or they didn't shoot and they yes, and you found them in Gaza. Gaza under siege now almost 18 years now or more, yes? How these people, they came in? Some of them, of course. And yes, and Hamas, they jumped to the wave and we fight them. And no, it's like the biggest lie ever. And they created to make like a dream goal. It's like long-term goal to make it from the Al-Furat or Nile. If you check, they have this dream. They teach their children in the books. Israel, the God promised them, promised land from Al-Furat, from Iraq to Nile River in Egypt. If you check in logic what happened in Iraq, what happened in Syria, what happened in Lebanon, what will happen in Jordan and in Palestine and Egypt, come on.
But I think
yes.
I think it's natural for like an occupying power to try and create that. I think that's fine. It's in fact they're doing it right now. They're trying to create an alternative through families, for example, and the kind of the tribal system in Gaza to create an alternative to Hamas, a governing body. They're using the aid kind of excuse and all of these things. I think it's always natural. I think it's a completely different thing though. They were started by Israel back in the 80s, but then they moved away a lot from that in the sense that they became a resistance movement, and I feel that they to the latter part of their before the genocide started, they were allowed to kind of get aid money from Qatar and all of these things, and Israel said no, turned a blind eye to it in the sense like, and they knew that Hamas was taking quite a lot of that aid money to themselves, right? So, and that is a form of continuous support. But actually, you can't say that they are completely aligned. They're not really, because they are a resistance movement. They're it's part of the fabrics of the society. And whether we agree or disagree with them, that is who they are, and we need to understand that very well. And as I said, it's not unusual for the occupying force to create an affiliated sort of or an alternative movement in there.
Then it gets out of hand, right?
Yes, it gets out of hand. That's yeah. Yes, yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So I think it's usual, but I think there is still hope. I think that things will change. I'm still hopeful. In the sense that maybe with the US elections that things will change, there'll be more pressure. I'm not, I mean, they will have no excuse by then for the Americans. Like, I'm more talking about the American people that will be putting more pressure on that government rather than sort of now, we're in limbo, we're not sure, we want to win the elections, so we don't want to make a decision that might upset somebody, so we're just going to be quite vague about it. But I think for me, I would like to hang on to hope wherever that exists. I think whether it's US elections or whether continuing resistance in Gaza, because I do think that is hopeful as well. And whether it is, international support, Arab countries, whatever it is, we need to find hope from somewhere. I want to end by reading this poem that I wrote on the plane here. And the reason why I want to end it, because I was flying here and I'm thinking, it's the same thought, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? So I started writing this poem, and it's the mixture that I think you share the same feeling as I do. Every single one of you, we fluctuate between hope, anger, as you said, and frustration and depression. You go on a demonstration, you feel empowered by everybody that goes around you and people you speak to. You come to this event, you feel inspired. You go back home, you check the news, it's shit. And it hits you like a car crash, right? And you see the images and you feel like, what the fuck is going on? And I feel this is natural, and I think you should feel like that. And keep going through this cycle, because it's important. Keep coming to these events. Keep signing those petitions. It's the little act of resistance. Have you read a book called Alone in Berlin by any chance? It's a beautiful book written about this guy in the Nazi Germany, where his act of resistance was he would write anti-Nazi messages on a piece of paper and throws it in government buildings, on the streets, sticks it on the walls or something like this, to the point where it pissed off the Nazis so much. Who is this person? How dare they? Right, and he used to print it from, like, get it together from newspaper cutting, the letters and stuff, and that was his act of resistance. Didn't change much, didn't stop the Holocaust, right? But you read about it now and you think, wait a minute, not all Germans were complicit in this. There was one person, and it's a true story, by the way. I'd recommend the book. You should read it. I also recommend my book, by the way, but that's a different matter.
Ahmed, can I just ask you that you read the poem for the end, and I just take three or four more sentences?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's really important also to say that on the 30th of October, Slovenian basketball team, Olimpijac Cedevita, is playing an Israeli team. And I think we've heard today about boycott. We've heard today about many actions people can take. And I hope that you were inspired and will be inspired. I think such normalization of genocide should not be happening. At the same time, I think it's worth mentioning that on the 7th of November, or 6th, 7th, and 8th of November, 6th of November, there's going to be a cultural embassy of Palestine that's happening more or less every year now for more than a decade, and we will have the honor to see the film From Ground Zero. Thank you, Nada. I was not prepared, and so this is improvisation. It's an amazing film that's actually a collage of short films or recordings made by the people in Gaza in the last year during the genocide, that was first accepted to Cannes Film Festival but then cancelled, but it was nonetheless screened next to the venue in a tent. So yes, I think better than maybe to come for a basketball game, come and see the film on the 6th of November, I think in Tega. There's going to be also a conversation with the director or the producer of the film. And yes, instead of divide and rule, I think it's time we unite and cooperate and resist against all kinds of supremacy and apartheid. And with this, I finish. Thank you very much. And I leave the last words to Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you. So first I'm reading this poem. It's quite fresh from the plane. I suppose I wrote it. So apologies if it doesn't make sense or if it's not edited properly. But here it goes. It's called Story. When it's all over, we might not be there, you and I. Our souls have been ruined forever. The memory stolen from us. The hope crushed under their tanks. The faith in others has faded away. Forgive me, for I have deceived you. Forgive the promises of the revolution as we lied in bed. Please don't ask me about my poetry. I have already crossed all the words. Please don't ask about my passionate lovemaking. It has gone. Don't search for me. Don't send me a postcard. Let my soul reincarnate to another revolutionary or an activist for climate change. If you want, you can collect my books. Take them to Jabalia and bury them there, along with the world's humanity. Maybe my words are going to grow a tree to tell the story of a genocide that happened there. A story that we have all seen, not a Greek myth, not a heroic tale, just a story about a people that have stood. And in turn, I will remember you. I will miss our kisses. I will miss our revolution. In bed or outside, I in turn will be free of all of this. Free to love again, free to revolt again. For Jabalia, for Bet Hanun, for Bet Lahia. For my Gaza and my family, I will rise again. And if my tears have gone, then my body will boil again. My fingers will write again. My heart will hope again. Until then, you may want to tell my story. The story of my sister Hind in Jabalia. The story of my nephews starving in between the heavy tanks. The story of my brother killed while searching for food. The story of neighborhood erased. The story of my mother displaced. My brother too. My brother too. My sister too. My sister too. My people. My country. All being ripped apart. Thank you very much.